Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk Fishing with No Limits, brought to you by Seagar High Performance Braid. Today, we're talking to the man himself, the doctor, the professor, whatever you want to call him. We're going to call him the kind of the walleye whisperer of all, Mr. Ali Shakoor. Ali, how's it going over there? What's happening in your world?
It is going awfully good over here. First of all, thanks for inviting me onto the podcast, man. I'm extremely honored to be here. Looking forward to talking all things fishing related, some biology, some fishing, and ready to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, you bet. So, for those that don't know, I'll let Ali introduce himself. Just give him a little background, kind of, fishing history. What are you doing out? Why do we call you the Walleye Whisperer? Why is this guy the go-to, for all of us? What's your day job and a little bit of fishing background? I mean, well, MWCs, MWTs,
Yeah,
people. Go ahead.
I don't know why people call me the fishing whisperer. I am Ali Shakoor. I'm from the state of Michigan, from Jackson, Michigan, originally in South Central Lower Michigan. So I grew up chasing largemouth bass, and northern pike, and especially panfish with my father. He was an avid outdoorsman. I always have to bring him up because without his upbringing, his tutelage, I would not be sitting here today. So we spent many a day on the water in the field. Chasing bluegill. He was a bluegill fanatic. He would drive to the ends of the earth. He'd get an In Fisherman magazine and say, "Hey, they're getting giant gills in Detroit Lake, Minnesota. Let's go," and we'd be off.
Awesome.
So that's kind of where I get my passion from. And along with that, I got to get this in also. He really used fishing. As a kid, I thought it was about fishing, but it wasn't. I learned everything that I needed to become a good man, a husband, a father, a citizen. In the outdoors with my father. So I must give him thanks and say how grateful I am to have had a father such as him. He's been gone a while now, so I got to bring him up to keep his name out there. Best fisherman no one knows. Besides that, I'm married, husband, father of two. I have two beautiful daughters that are 20 and 16. One's a college athlete. She runs track. She's at University of Dayton, All Atlantic 10 last year. Dean's List, doing well. My youngest is also doing extremely well, honor society, very high GPA, also an outstanding athlete. So, we hold them to a high standard, as I was held to a high standard before we even get into the outdoor stuff. So that's me.
Well, the apple didn't fall far from the tree then.
Yeah, that's what I'm about, first and foremost. So
that's right.
Yeah,
That's good. I got a couple of those smart kids too, and they're my stepkids. So my apple fell quite a ways from that tree, but it didn't fall far from their mom's tree because she's a smart one as well with all the degrees. But an athlete, I know you and I are both a couple gym rats, and especially this time of year. But that's paid off. The daughter's a track star.
It has. We put a lot of time in with them. We're blessed to have been blessed with two wonderful children. We put our time in, of course, but it says something about their makeup and their frame of mind also. So that is where my base, my root, and where I'm coming from, and everything I do branches off those things.
It's a good foundation, and I mean, clearly you made it. Your father laid it out for you perfect.
Yeah, I would like to think so. He definitely had some foresight and some vision. He didn't make it very far in school. He worked hard for his family, but he really stretched education. If I walked in the door with a C or something, oh boy, it was hell to pay the captain. So I learned early on that anything short of excellence, or at least giving 110% of your best effort, everything else was uncivilized and it would not be accepted. So again, that kind of has opened up some avenues, some opportunities for me, just being able to put that effort in where maybe I may not quite get it, but I'll work my ass off to get there.
Those are even the school of hard knocks and the lessons learned and what have you, but that's something our society is definitely missing nowadays. We don't have enough the father figures like you had, growing up, or even just, fathers like yourself and me being a military guy, the discipline and the expectations for those, their children moving up and understanding that there's consequences with those actions
Hell yes.
when you fail to meet the standards.
There are definitely consequences, and consequences, for not listening. Not just the standard, but to listen. One of the last things my dad said to me before he left this earth was, "Hey, you were a good son." Even when I was married and had kids, when I started talking, even if you knew where you thought you knew, you shut your mouth and you listened. Um, and history taught me that even if I did not, and we can get into this with fishing also, but even if I didn't understand what he was saying at the time, there comes a time where that light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
And even though he's been gone for 12 years now, I see things with my family or I see things in the public and I think back, oh shoot, that's what Papa was talking about even now. So again, I try to press that into the girls that hey, you need to listen, and they have absorbed all that I have to offer, and I'm awfully pleased with them.
I think it's cool when you see your kids growing up and you tell them all these things, right? And you're like, and they're just looking at you like, what the hell's he talking about? You
Yeah.
know, but then that light bulb goes off maybe 4 or 5 years later down the road. And,
Yep.
you
Yep.
see them do something. You're like, I mean, I see my stepson do it and I'm like, he was listening, or now all of a sudden now he's preaching the same thing you were preaching to him, to his little sister or whatever the case may be. You're
Yep.
like, he gets it. It just was a little bit about, ahead of his time. But if you're
It,
not listening, you won't get it.
that's right. It's a great feeling. It's a great feeling. And then from there, as far as what I'm doing right now, so I'm an aquatic ecologist. So I have a bachelor's degree in biology and a minor in chemistry. I have a master's degree from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources, where I did some work on northern Lake Huron with lake whitefish. I'm finishing up a doctorate at Wayne State. I will be defending my dissertation this coming spring/summer. So with that, I'm studying impacts of harmful algal blooms on multi levels of the food web. So I have a chapter on walleye, which we can talk about. Taking a look at the impacts of microcystis, which is the main mat-forming cyanobacteria on Lake Erie, impacts on walleye egg hatch and survival, lipid content, and by lipid content, that's just the fat content, using it as a proxy for body condition, growth rates. Another chapter dealing with green frog tadpoles and microplastics to get another level of the food web. And then finally, the one that I'm working on right now is really exciting. So I'm using hydroacoustics, multi-beam, multi-frequency hydroacoustics. So we went out and we flew this airplane type structure with 4 transducers, 70, 110, 200, and 400 kilohertz. And we mapped, we ran a transect on Lake Erie. So I'm using it to map subsurface concentrations of cyanobacteria or harmful algal blooms and fish communities inside and outside of that bloom with some other water quality parameters. So seeing how fish are utilizing that bloom, whether they're remaining inside of it or fleeing the edges, taking a look at prey fish, and then taking a look at some things like toxicity, how it may impact their health. So that's a really cool chapter. I'm processing data right now for that. That's part of NOAA, federal government. So that's where that data is coming from. Went out with those guys who I'm doing some other work for on Lake Michigan, also utilizing some hydroacoustics to measure fish communities in Lake Michigan also.
Interesting stuff. Wayne State. Which Wayne State is that? Out of Nebraska
Yeah,
online, or is it?
Nebraska, great football team. At least in the past, I've seen they had a pretty decent football team. But Wayne State in Detroit. So
Oh, okay. I had to ask. I'm like, I only know Wayne. I didn't play there. I coached football, high school football camps up at Wayne State with some of the.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a hell of a school.
yeah.
But we got a Wayne State in Detroit. Okay, I'm sure there's probably a dozen Wayne States out there. But
I think those may be the only two.
is
I've
it?
seen those two. Yep. So I'm in Detroit, Michigan, right on the shores of the Detroit River, not too far from Lake St. Clair, not too far from Lake Erie. So we're centrally located and doing some good work over there.
Yeah, that's I did the whole natural resources, fisheries, wildlife biology at University of Nebraska Lincoln, and yeah, you got to be a nerd to be into that stuff, man. You got it, but most everybody I know that was in those they're all fishermen and hunters.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, they all wanted to learn a little bit more. We got geeked out over really algae blooms and stupid little things that everybody else is like, this is gross, but because you're in it going, okay, how's this relate to my fishing?
No doubt.
Right? And everybody, and it was hunting was the same. I mean, we're doing habitat, all this type of stuff, and everybody in those classes all the time. I mean, probably 80-90% of them were just like they were outdoors,
Yeah.
people, period.
Yeah. It's a labor of love. When I first got into it, there were some people in it. It was more an academic pursuit, and there's still some. I really like to see people like you and I who really, really have an interest in the outdoors get involved and are able to advocate for certain types of research and do certain things. But again, it's not a field where you're going to become a billionaire, but it's a
No,
quality.
not at all.
Yeah,
That's why I left it.
exactly. It's a quality of life thing, and just
Yeah.
satisfaction in working in the outdoors.
Yeah, it is. It is totally. And I don't think people understand it. We just did a podcast on conservation type thing, and I did that in particular to try to educate, and that was really kind of bare knuckles, low level on how where the funding comes from.
Mhm.
Because so many people just don't understand the Pittman Robertson, the Dingle Johnson, and government and state and matching and how all that stuff works. I think you did a lot of that on the science side and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and your local agencies and knowing all and how much effort there is between the locals and federals and and what have you, and just how much stuff is being done that most people don't know that's it's even happening.
Yeah, there's a ton. There's even there's the Herb Family Foundation here in Detroit. So you even have these smaller foundations. I mean, they bought me some acoustic telemetry equipment to implant in the fish and track fish tags and receivers. So there's a lot of interaction between the different government and non-governmental agencies. So sometimes we have to scrape this money up to really do this work, and there is a ton that goes into it to try to get some of this stuff done.
Yeah, time probably being the biggest thing,
It's the biggest. I don't
and
have enough
it
time in a day.
right, and in science, it's not overnight. It's usually a 3-year minimum study.
Yeah.
Of type. A
Yeah.
system. We just did one of those. Had it funded through the University of Nebraska. Where we did transmitters and receivers in walleye
Hmm.
and track the movement. Hopefully get him on here soon to kind of explain how that all went down. But it just blew people's mind, and we caught a lot of those and worked with him. Particularly because my guys are on that body of water every day that he was doing it,
Hmm.
and so he'd be like, I need to get some fish tagged, but I don't know where they're at. I'm like, well, you got to go here, and he was like, awesome, thanks. Now I know where they spawn. This is where we're going to collect them,
Yep.
put them in, and then we caught some, and one of my guys took them out and washed them, cut it open, stick it in there, stitch them back up. And then every time we caught those fish, I would save the transmitter and send him the number, and he'd give you the whole here's where it went. Here's everything this fish done, has done since it's been tagged, and it was
Yeah,
pretty.
that's pretty cool. I've done those surgeries and implanted the transmitters and everything. It's pretty cool. I think I may have posted some of that stuff in the past. I'm gonna start posting some more again. Some of the videos of the surgeries, how the transmitters and receivers work, and some of the I'm actually processing some more of that stuff right now as far as making the movement maps for the last chapter of my dissertation. So it's pretty cool to see.
How many walleye you got growing in your house right now?
Uh, Not none right now, but come springtime, yeah, I'll have some more going. I get the egg and beta knock and start raising walleye, and it's really cool. Again, I have a bunch of walleye and perch videos that I hatch them from eggs and grow them, and I had some juvenile videos to watch how they feed and do some really cool stuff. You see some mind blowing things that these walleye do. It's pretty cool to see.
It is. You're learning live scope from a different perspective. From the early onset.
It is, and some of the stuff that you see on live scope, you see the movement and everything. It directly mimics what I've seen in the tanks.
Really,
But I've actually been able to watch the fish live, so it
right?
adds another kind of dimension of what I'm seeing on the live scope, which is it was cool to see the two things, the live scope and the actual movements of the fish sync up in the lab. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is, and that's going to give any angler out there an upper hand, understanding the whole process and movement.
It does, and I think live scope is really really you know cutting down the learning curve, really opening some eyes as far as behavior. And
Yep,
you know you hear a lot of people saying, "Hey, I had no idea they did that."
yep.
For a lot of different species, and especially walleye. We're walleye anglers primarily. So yeah, we can talk about some live scope here and some of the
You
issues
know,
coming out.
the bass guys are like, I didn't know there was bass there.
Yeah,
Right now, they're out fishing in the middle of the pond and throwing minnows and suspended fish in all spring. Going, I thought you only had to fish the bank.
yeah.
It's these fish haven't been pressure, right? It's a
It,
whole
it
nother world down there.
it's funny. I'd go out fishing. I'd have my spinning gear, and they'd ask me, you going crappie fishing? What are you doing with those fairy wands? And now every bass boat is spinning gear and jig and
Yep.
plastic, and they're basically pitching jigs like we do for suspended bass for the most part. And it's refreshing to be able to throw that in some of my friends' faces as they go out to fish in a way.
Right. Like I've been doing this all along, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, they may be ahead in the tournament and payout world and the funds and all that, but we might be ahead in the minnow fishing because we've been doing it a long
Oh
time.
yeah, we're way ahead.
Way ahead. And so, yeah, you talk about Lake Erie and the algae blooms. Um, I mean, Lake Erie, a lot of people don't know the history of it and what it was before the mass, the walleye capital, basically. I think,
Yeah.
before it turned into what it is. And I had that talk with a lot of people on the boat as a guide, and we talk about zebra mussels a lot,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I've spoken at a deal and at once that it was a outdoor wild game feed for a church's men's group. And the state park manager and the local game board wanted me to come talk. And then the CEO asked me what my thought on zebra mussels were. And I was like, they're awesome. For
Yeah.
perspective, I was like, they're great. And he just shook his head. He's like, I knew you were going to say that. I'm like, well, if you didn't want the answer, you don't ask the question. So, but I'm like, what was Lake Erie prior to zebra mussel? What was Green Bay? I was like, in this fishery, and it's changed things. So we can talk about zebra mussel a little bit, but I'm just bringing that back into Lake Erie and the algae, which obviously it still has. But I mean, years ago, that place it looked like you could walk across it.
Yeah, you could. Just going back a little bit. At one point there was a Time magazine headline that called Lake Erie a dead lake.
Yep.
The pollution was so bad. The Rouge River caught on fire. The water burned. The same thing happened in Cleveland. One of the rivers caught on fire because of all the chemicals and pollutants that floated on the surface. Really murky, really dirty water. The Clean Water Act of 1972, originally, I think it was, kind of slapped some regulations on some of the companies and everything. At some point, backing up, recreational fishery in the state of Michigan was actually closed. No, in Canada it was closed. State of Michigan never closed it. Canada closed the lake to recreational fishermen because it was so polluted. But again, Clean Water Act kind of cleaned it up a little bit. And then kind of moving forward, it cleaned up over the years. We had the introduction of zebra mussels, which were discovered in Lake St. Clair originally.
That
They
place is clean.
they did clean it up. Fun fact: there aren't any zebra mussels left in Lake Erie and around these lakes. They've been replaced by quagga mussels, which is a close cousin, we'll call them. They grow a little bit larger. They're able to persist in different substrates. So zebra mussel with their byssal threads, they need hard substrate like rock. Quagga mussels are able to persist in mud. So they live deeper. They don't need that rocky substrate. So zebra mussels were really shallow. They were in a shallow rocky. So they created what was referred to as a nearshore shunt. So they were in a nearshore rocky area. They filter so much. A zebra mussel or a drysynid will filter about a liter of water a day. They were saying that there's so many zebra mussel or drysynids in Lake Erie that the entire Western Basin is filtered about once every 7 days or so. So they're really cleaning it up, but they were sequestering that energy near shore. So that was really impacting offshore food webs, but it was cleaning the water up. So now you have, weed growth growing out, 20 feet. Before you couldn't see 5 or 6 feet. Now you have weeds 20, 25 feet deep. Clarity has really improved. And it's really impacted the fisheries. It made some fisheries more vulnerable, but the fisheries have rebounded. On top of that, you throw in round gobies, which came in a few years later. Dave Jude, who discovered the first round goby in the Detroit River. I played basketball with Dave Jude. I was there when he brought the first round goby. He brought it to the basketball court in a jar.
Like, what is this thing, man?
Exactly, some kind of goby. It shouldn't be here. And he took it over to the museum, and Jerry Smith, who was one of my instructors at University of Michigan, God rest his soul, identified it, and the rest is history. But again, those two organisms coming in have really changed the fishery, and I hate to use the term because it's been overused recently. It's the new normal. Lake Erie, we can't go back to what it was, but it has. I hate to say that an invasive species has improved the lake, but they
I'll
have.
say it. It has.
They have
And it has a lot of places.
yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it because it's a reality.
Yep.
They have improved the fishery. They've changed the fishery, but they have improved smallmouth bass fishery, the walleye fishery, and some others. They've made a huge difference in the Great Lakes and other bodies of water now too across the country.
Yeah, it's they're spreading like crazy. And I know Minnesota and South Dakota kind of has an emergency response team, and I've talked to them enough for the years, and I think they've kind of been like, all right, we're gonna Minnesota's dumping millions of dollars chasing this stuff around, and I'm like, you can't stop it. You just said that they're not now they're quagga mussels in areas instead of zebra mussels. It's like you just got to let Mother Nature do what it's going to do. You're not going to stop these things, right? They can be transported by not just boats and whatever, but by every other flying individual or driving thing that's out there.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
like, it's going to work. It's nature has a way of doing things, and he's balancing these ecosystems out.
yeah. You just said you said one of my favorite phrases I've ever heard uttered. Actually comes from Jurassic Park, when the dinosaurs started reproducing and they weren't supposed to, and he says, "Nature finds a way."
Yep.
It's one of my favorite phrases. But yeah, once these things get in, nature will always find a new equilibrium.
Yep.
You may not like what that equilibrium is, but it is what it is
Yep.
at that point. So yeah, nature does find a way. And like they're gonna spread. I mean, I've seen studies where they've made it through. Hell, I've seen studies where fish eggs have made it through the digestive tract of waterfowl and have been spread that way. So they're gonna spread. It's inevitable. I hate to say it like that again because it sounds like just let it go, but you know
You
it
can
is
slow
what
it
it.
down, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe
just slow it down.
maybe you're,
Even the treatments, there's some things they can treat them with to keep them off, water intakes and the like. But even that,
Mhm.
after a while, just about become futile. They're really tough once they get in. So you gotta sometimes you get in, you make some efforts, but sometimes you just kind of hang on for the ride and do the best you can.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I know. I mean, they're checking you pull them boats out. It's like I just the boat hasn't been sitting there. I just put it in today. I've been driving around full throttle. Nothing got in the boat. Now, not say you can catch a stick and bring it in, and one fell off, and there's ways. I'm like, I didn't.
Yeah,
Nothing got in. I mean, because I don't know how
you
many
got
of they pulled boats out and went. Oh, there's one. I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen unless it's been sitting at the boat slip for several weeks.
yeah, you got bait bucket transfers, and
Yeah, yeah,
there's a lot of different vectors, and you can't catch them all, but you can do your due diligence and try.
yeah. That's all you can do. Educate and help people drain, dry, pull the plug, and that we can only do so much. Like I said, nature's got to find a way, and it's going to do its thing. So, as we've seen all over the country, and the world, nature's going to do its thing. It's going to change things. You're talking about the algae blooms, and you're kind of watching some of those fish dip it down. Are they? Do you find them moving with those blooms, like
Yeah,
underneath? They like the low light, and
yeah. So back to that, and just to kind of give an interplay, and what we find in ecology is that everything's interrelated. We can talk about drysenids and zebra mussels and round goby, but you have to talk about zebra mussels and the bloom itself. So these blooms have always happened in Lake Erie and the big lakes, Titicaca, Taihu in China, small inland lakes, small farm ponds. It's always happened. But what has happened in Lake Erie is that zebra mussel, quagga mussels are filter feeders, like I mentioned earlier, but they are selective. So what they do is they'll filter the water. They eat algae. There's video. You can see this on YouTube. I can send you a link. You can post it if you like to kind of get it in here. But they will filter and they will eat green algae, but then they will release cyanobacteria. And so what happens is the population becomes skewed. So you start to see where cyanobacteria are out competing green algae.
hmm.
That's causing a big issue with the bloom. And there's some other chemical stuff that I won't go into here that goes on with some of the legacy chemicals. And anoxia, low oxygen, kind of makes a way for some mercury to become methylated and some other chemicals to become active again to kind of feed into some other advisories and some of the bloom issues also. So there's this complex interaction with these invasive species also that has kind of exacerbated the bloom. So those blooms have become the past few years pretty large. In 2014, about 750,000 people in southeastern Lower Michigan, northwestern Ohio lost their water. They get their water supply from Lake Erie at the water intake down around Toledo, Little Cedar Point. We had a hard northeast blow, and it stacked that algae up down to the bottom, and it started being sucked up into the intake.
Yeah, I remember that year I was with National Wildlife Federation as a board member and did a little boat tour out there, and the
Mhm.
NCO went out and dipped down a glass,
Yeah.
just
Yep.
drinking glass water, and was like,
That's a famous picture. I use that.
yeah, it was solid.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
good.
So those blooms have caused some issues. We haven't had a bloom quite to that level of severity in a while, and a lot of people ask what kind of kicks those blooms off. They're pretty much predicated on springtime rainfall. The Maumee River, which actually has the largest walleye migration of any river east of the Mississippi. Grew up fishing that river with my dad. Goes to a lot of agricultural land. And so when we get a lot of springtime rainfall, that bloom will start down there. Sometime you get the river is really flashy, it'll flood and it'll sink back, it'll go back down, but you'll have these little pools that are left over. They're on the shoreline and the sun hits them and heats them up really hot, and then the algae will start to grow, and then the next flood is washed in. NOAA has detected cyanobacteria at their real-time detectors in Western Basin Lake Erie as early as March, which is extremely early. It is early. So they detected it as early as March, which kind of feeds into my first chapter about walleye interacting with bloom. So yeah, so it's caused some issue. Fish are, you know, the toxins from cyanobacteria is the issue. They can be hepatotoxic, neurotoxic, endotoxic. They can have some bad impacts. Human health, they haven't really addressed it, or they haven't really talked about it here too much. I know there was a nursing home in Brazil. The people were immunocompromised, but they had water cyanobacteria get into their water supply, and about 55 people died after exposure. In Grand Lake St. Mary, which is out of the Great Lakes watershed, but it's just south in Ohio, there were some families who lost pets. They have real bad blooms down there, and the pets went swimming in the algae and ended up dying. So there can be some serious health implications for higher level
Yeah,
vertebrates.
we get it on our inland lakes just around here in the summer when it's real hot and
Yeah.
stagnant. I mean, the GFP puts out a report, no swimming, don't
Hmm.
let your pets out, just stay out of that. And they're real small lakes usually,
Yeah.
and then it's 2 weeks go by or rain or something happens, and they're like, all right, it's the beach is open again.
Yeah. Yeah. Folks need to heed those warnings when they do put those out, but they do have impacts on fish as well. There can be behavioral changes. If you have a fish that are demersal, which means they live on the bottom, there's been instances where they've noted where those fish are no longer they're starting to spin in the water column now. Or you have fish that are primarily nocturnal will start to become active in the daytime, which makes them susceptible to predation, to being eaten.
Probably
It
just because of low light conditions, I imagine, right
that's,
throughout the
that
whole.
can be part of it, yeah, but it actually changes their behavior, at a deeper level than that. There can be issues with reproduction. It can negatively impact reproduction, but then those decreases in reproductive success will compound or are able to compound over the years. And in a long-lived species such as walleye, which live about 20 years or so, that could be an issue if it ever were to get going good. So there are some impacts that it can have on fish. Some unpublished data from Ohio DNR are showing that larger walleye were actually using it as cover. Um, Educated guess would be that minnows, bait fish, prey fish are using that dark edge as cover. And then the predators, the larger fish, are kind of following along on those edges. Excuse me. To be able to pick those fish off. So there are some interactions that are starting to be shown between fish and the bloom. And so with my stuff with the hydroacoustics, I'm looking to kind of get a better look at that. Because we actually drove a boat. We started in clean. The transect is about 10 miles long. So we have 5 miles outside of the bloom, 5 miles inside the bloom. Daytime and nighttime cruises pinging the entire time. So I'll be able to tell if there's a difference between night and day inside the bloom and outside the bloom, and I'll link it to some bait fish things and everything to try to make some connections. So, but there are some possible connections there that are going to come out of this data.
Man, it's interesting and deep stuff. You keep referring to the migration. You know, you've done seminar. I've seen it. At the MPA conference, you gave one a few years back,
Hmm.
and you seem to know the walleye migration for Lake Erie better than pretty much anybody. I don't. Well, I guess tuned in because they've heard of it. And they're like, I want to hear about this. I want to know
All right.
what how's this working. Most of us get it east west west east Detroit River. Just kind of give a big picture, a rundown on a little bit of the movement over there and how that all kind of
Yeah.
happens.
First of all, whenever I talk about this kind of stuff, I say Lake Erie, but you have to remember that this happens everywhere.
Right.
Happens in Sakakawea, happens in Hawaii, happens in a farm pond in Iowa. The only thing that made difference is that may change is scale and magnitude. We talk about fishing humps in Green Bay. It comes up 20 feet out of 60 feet. In a farm pond in Iowa, it may be a foot out of 8 feet. So it's when you think about these things, just think the difference is just scale and magnitude. It still happens the same way. So, primarily, there's a lot that goes on here. Um,
Well, we could summarize it.
Yeah,
I know it's hard to do without all the slides and
yeah.
stuff. So
Just some broad generalizations. So you have various stocks of fish in the Great Lakes. So you have spawning population in the Detroit River. You have the Reef Complex. You have Sandusky River. You have Maumee River. You have one a lot of people don't know about, which is a Henship Complex. The islands there in Canadian water. It's actually the third largest, genetically speaking, spawning population in the system. But then you also have fish that'll come down out of Lake St. Clair, Saginaw Bay. You'll have fish that go from Lake Erie to Saginaw Bay and Lake St. Clair. So there's this constant, call it a mishmash
right,
of populations that are constantly mixing to go different places. You have fish that are reef spawners. You have fish that are river spawners. So you have a thing called spawning site fidelity where they'll go back to salmon have it, they go back to their natal streams. Kind of the same thing with walleye. If they're reef spawners, they'll go back to the same reefs, generally speaking. River spawners will go back to the rivers, but sometimes in certain years, the river spawners will pull up short and spawn in the lake. So there's a lot that goes on here, but basically the fish will start west. They're going to start in the Detroit River. They're going to spawn, and some of those fish will spawn a lot earlier than what people think. And a lot of time, not all the time, but a lot of times those are going to be a larger fish. It's the reason that a lot of guys will run east really early when there's a tournament early and get into some big fish. Those fish have dropped. They're heading back east and are eating it along the way. And they're really getting their weight back up until they're about the size of being pre-spawn fish again. And they're actively feeding. A lot of their energy isn't going to spawn, and so those fish are good fish to try to target. When I was in northern Wisconsin doing some work with muskie under the ice up there early on, I'd be out spotlighting muskie at night, and I would see walleye spawning under the ice up there on some of those lakes.
said that for years. I don't care if the ice is off or not. And April, I'm like, when they're going to spawn, they're going to spawn.
They're spawning. Trust me, I've seen it. I've seen it with
Photosynthesis. I always say it in seminars. I'm like, these women don't go into heat because there's a full moon.
That's right.
Correct. You gotta ovulate. You gotta ovulate. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
While they are waiting for 44 degrees and a full moon and all these things, they're gonna spawn when they're gonna spawn.
And remind me about the seminar, because you said we can go anywhere with this. So let's talk about, you said 40, and that's another thing. People say, they're gonna spawn at 44, and it's actually, it's not. It's the pace of the warming that does it. It's not 42. Yeah, peak may happen at 46, but another year peak may happen at 44. Peak may happen at 42. But it's the pace. You have a rapid increase. We had a rapid increase one year in March. It was early March. And I'm catching males that are melting on the reefs in the second week of March, first week of March. So it's the pace of the warming that kind of kicks off that activity. Everything is hormonal. And a lot of, they get those cues from length of day as far as the development of gonads, milk and eggs in females in the fall. As the days grow shorter, that kicks off something. But then after that happens, there's another hormonal surge, which is kind of dictated by some other things, including water temperature, that kind of kicks them into spawning. So yes, they will spawn under the ice. They do spawn under the ice. I've seen it. I've seen it in multiple lakes. I've seen it in several different places in different states. So you're damn right. They will spawn under the ice, and they do spawn under the ice. But back to the migration. So they're going to start west and spawn, and as that water temperature starts to warm. So generally speaking, you can think of adult walleye almost like a salmon. They're looking for that cool water. If you think about it, when you're fishing Lake Erie in the springtime, pre-spawn, you're looking for what? You're looking for dirty water, right? That dirty water is a couple of degrees warmer. If you find a big patch of cooler water next to that dirty water and start fishing, guarantee you're going to catch fish that are still long, 28, 29, 30 inches, but they're going to be long and skinny because they've dropped. So they need that warm water metabolically to help those eggs develop, get the metabolism ramping. After they spawn, preferred temperature of an adult walleye that size, generally speaking, is about 20 degrees. So about 62, 60 degrees or so, somewhere in that range. So after they spawn, they immediately start looking for that cooler water, right? So two ways you can think about migrations. Walleye can make two types of migrations, horizontal and vertical. Vertical involves distance. Horizontal is depth. So in a lake or a river system, your coolest water is always where? On the bottom. It's deep. So those fish will spawn. You catch them up high. Think about it. You're Erie. You're
Yeah.
somewhere, one of your big lakes. You're fishing super high.
20 feet back, right?
Exactly. 20 feet back. You don't even mark them sometimes.
Yep.
They drop. They want to get the cooler water instead of going horizontal and having to make where they have to make a big run. They can simply just drop down to the bottom, lay in the mud, recuperate. The water's a little bit cooler. It may not be preferred, but it's cooler than that surface temperature. So a lot of people will go, they'll make these runs, they'll leave an area. Oh, the fish are gone. They spawn, they've taken off when they simply could have just dropped down to the bottom. And I have crankbaits where you can barely see through the bill anymore because I'm literally just grinding bottom and grinding and grinding and grinding.
Yep. I always drop that 3 or 4 ounce bouncer off the back corner of the boat, stick that one on the bottom.
Exactly. And this is where understanding biology and the migration can really help. So those fish don't necessarily have to leave first. First, they will drop. And wherever together, I'll show you. I have tag data to show this as they drop in the water column by calendar, also by calendar month. So this is kind of verified in the telemetry.
Well, you think so? The perception is I've heard it for years, and I don't always agree with it. And you probably know best is that people are like, well, once they spawn, they're done. They go inactive. A 2-week window after the spawn, the fish don't eat. And I'm like, I think that's the biggest crock of crap I've ever heard.
No.
I'm pretty sure they're hungrier than they've ever been.
Yes. Yeah. Up until that point, they've directed all energy into gamete development, eggs and milk. Somatic growth, which is normal body tissue, has ceased. Everything, all the energy is going into reproducing. And after they've spawned, they got to get that weight back on there. They're not going to make it. They're not going to make it after the rigors are spawning. So they're hungry. But let's say they were inactive. They're predators. Again, keying back into some fishing. If you come across a bear or a wolf or a predator in the woods, what's the first thing they tell you? Don't run.
Don't run, or at least run faster than that guy, right?
Yeah, or have a shaped friend who you're faster with.
Right.
But don't run. That tells you right there what keys a predator's instincts. Speed. You drop those bait down to the bottom, you grind, you get a lot of deflection, and you crank it up.
Yep.
A lot of people have this idea that in the springtime you have to be 1-1 or 1-2 or 1-3 on a GPS. I've had days where I'm 2-5, 2-6, 2-7. I've been 3 miles an hour. It's a reaction bite. When that bait goes by them really fast, whether they're hungry or not, they're gonna snap at it. They may not chase, but they're gonna snap. Now we're talking about doing some other things. I'll switch out the back hook, upsize it a little bit, because a lot of times you'll see it in the spring when you start catching those fish. They'll come in with one hook.
Yep.
Because that bait went by really fast. They're not super active, but they just took a snap at it because of that instinct, right? So just tying it back into the fishing and some of the things that you can do and understanding the mood that they're in.
I found that out my first time at Lake Erie. It was an NWT tournament, 2015 or something like that. It was beautiful out. We had the whole week was nice. I think there's one windy day of practice. And I'm like, this place is awesome. It's flat, calm. It's April. I'm in a t-shirt and shorts. It's phenomenal. But I'm used to trolling 2 to 3 mile an hour on a river.
Mm-hmm.
I get the troll master in, and it's 1-2. You got to go slow. And we caught fish. That was kind of a pretty good prime. Erie was putting out a lot of those, 40 plus pound bags at that time for everybody was cranking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think day 1, I weighed in 1 fit. We lost, knocked some off. Day 1 sucked. Day 2, I'm calling, shaking off 25s by noon. You're done. You're calling, coming with 35 pounds. And all I did was bump it up to 2 something.
Speed will
I started watch the outside board. Card catch him on a turn. I'm like, charter boat's catching him. He ain't going under 2 mile an hour because he can't.
Mm-hmm.
And just bumped it up and just literally just started doing figure eights, and it was lights out. I remember talking to Bill Sutton. He got cut off by the ferry, or he was going to cut off, so he had to bump it up to get around it in time. And as soon as he did that, bam, 30, 31, 32 incher.
Exactly. And again, that just comes from, we get in these habits as fishermen. No, water's cold. You need to go slow. You need to upsize. You need to do all these things. But, understanding biology and how different species react, they're a predator. They're going to react like a predator. You give them some speed, they're going to bite. They're going to snap at it at the very least. They may not be hungry, but instinct's going to kick in. So yeah, spot on. So again, just trying to mix some fishing stuff in as I go. So after these fish have spawned, they're going to start to go east. They're going to drop down. Some will go east directly because they're trying to stay ahead of that advancing water. I'm going to make some generalizations here. And a lot of people think that they're chasing bait, but the stuff that I've seen and the papers I've read and people I've talked to who have been out there really more than I have, show that the bait fish thing is not, you know, it's not the driving force. It's more a water temperature thing, and going back to their home waters, because some of these fish are Eastern Basin fish. Some will stop in the Central Basin and stay there all summer, so they kind of get back to their home water. Some are going to go back to Saginaw Bay, but it, as you're following the migration, and I'm gonna try to not be Erie specific, because I can tell you in April they're in the Detroit River Island Complex. In May they're on Huron Dump. In July they're on Lorraine Dump. In August they're in Cleveland. In September they're going to be off Geneva, Mentor. Then finally off Ashtabula. In October they're in out east in Erie, Pennsylvania, in that deep water, eating bloater and shiner. And then they start to come back. That's the basic migration in a nutshell. But as you think about how these fish move across your body of water, you want to think about structure, and structure that will hold these fish, because they're going to migrate. They're going to leave. And a lot of people will get burned, especially on Erie fish and shallow fish, because there's nothing there to hold them. And I always say shallow fish have track shoes on, right? If you catch them, you got fish in Lorraine and the Black River's dumping. If the lake is clear and it's dumping dirty water, if the lake is dirty and it's pumping clear water, or it's a degree warmer, a degree cooler, it's going to hold them. It has to be something different. It'll hold them there. But if everything is homogeneous and uniform, those fish have track shoes on, their heads down, they're going to where they're going. I prefer deeper fish. One, those deeper fish are less susceptible to barometric changes, pressure changes. They're less susceptible to boat traffic. So I prefer those deeper fish. And I know that those deeper fish are going to be on breaks. They're going to be on structure. They're going to be on a dumping ground. They're going to be on current breaks, which are really, really important. A lot of people get hung up on thinking about structure as being hard and fast. Current is huge. The Great Lakes are just a large river. They're just like the Missouri River. It's just a large river system. That's it. And walleye are fish of current. I fish with a current measuring device in the boat to find these currents, to find intersecting currents, to look at all these different things. So as fish are migrating across your system, think about things that will hold them. Deep points. If you have a bunch of deep points in a row, what's different about one point? Is it a little bit deeper? Is it a little bit shallower? Is it rock instead of sand? So these fish are making these migration to stay in that cooler water, but they're going to hold. They're going to hold on specific pieces of structure that are different. You don't really want to catch them on bait, especially pelagic bait either, because they move so much. If you're looking at being repeatable, unless you're going to really chase that bait. So again, there's a repeatable, there's a pattern that you can kind of follow every year, but the best fishermen always get on something a little bit different within that pattern. So you have these large pieces of structure I'm talking about, points, the dumping ground, Sandusky, Huron, Lorraine, but then you have these smaller pieces of structure, less apparent. Changes, water changes are huge. Again, current breaks are really huge. If you're ever on Lake Erie, you should go to NOAA's page. There's a resource page that shows depth averaged currents by month, and it's historical. So from January to December, it has the large scale water movements or currents, and it shows all the gyres. It shows, and when you think about it, you fish Erie a lot, you think there's always fish on the southwest corner of dumping ground. There's a large gyre that sets up, goes around the Canadian shore, comes down Peely Point, gets deflected, and it rips right across the southwest corner of the dump, southwest corner of the dump, excuse me. And those fish are always there at that time of year as a result of it. It brings perch in and holds them. So all these things are happening during the migration. But again, as you think about this migration on your lake or on the river system that you fish, again, look for structure and look for water temperature. Surface temperature a little bit, but I use a unit to measure temperature at depth, which has been priceless.
Fish hawk?
I do use a fish hawk. I use a portable, the X2. It's a great unit. I have full disclosure. I have a relationship with Fish Hawk, and I'm not here to sell product, but it has been.
Yeah, Ryan Buddy was on here talking about. I had him bust one out and kind of explain it. And I think I put the link in his podcast to it. So I've never used one, but I'm like, seems like it makes an awful lot of sense to have one in your boat. So.
It does. It gives you temp and speed at depth. Again, I can tell you a bunch of different times, but off Kelly's Island, I had a good bite going, 45 feet of water. The fish were 40 feet down, and there was a hard current out of the east. So going east, I was 1-1, 1-2, like you think in the springtime, but going back into it to get the action the fish wanted, I was actually 2-3 or so, and people looking at me like, this guy's really cooking. And we were just wailing on big fish. We're doing 40 plus a day out there in pre-fish because they wanted it fast. They wanted that action into the current. So that fish hawk and other units like it are really, really invaluable, especially for finding those temperature breaks that those large walleye want. So again, if you're interested in those type of things, take a look at those units. They're really they're worth every dollar that you spend on them.
A little bit about some high performance products that I use, and I'm pretty sure you're going to love it too. It's the Seaguar Smackdown braid. There's 3 things about this thin diameter braid that I just absolutely love. 1, it's tough as nails. 2, longest casting, smoothest braid I've ever used. The 8-strand braid, tubular form, just comes off those reels, super smooth, long cast. It doesn't make a lot of noise. It's awesome. And 3, it's super sensitive. No matter what kind of lure or jig I'm throwing out there, I can tell. I've grass, weeds, rocks, sand bottom, I can feel it all right through there into my rod. The stuff is extremely sensitive. So Smackdown comes in 2 colors, high vis and stealth gray. Get yourself some of this stuff and you're gonna get yourself some more of these. Check them out at seaguar.com.
Yeah, it definitely sound like it. So the Detroit River, right? We went there a few years back for the NWT. It was mid crap weather, of course, and the bite was so. Bucket list place. I was pretty pumped to go there. I just wish it would have been a little warmer. But
It was awful.
but I had a couple days of practice where I think I got them pretty good.
Yeah.
And not so much. I think I got one each day in a tournament, 5-pounder each day. But what's the approach there? I know, and there's up by the bridges, and you've been on, St. I see you, for those that don't know, Ali's been a co-host on the Next Bite a couple times. I think you've done some, and I think probably even done some this fall maybe out there. But you did them, St. Clair, you did them in Detroit River. Kind of sum up Detroit River fishing a little bit for those.
Detroit River fishing is outstanding. That fishery is crazy. It's not like the heyday. There were times out there I fished in MWC. I had 46 pounds after day one. I was, we were like 8th place.
50 year Oliver and Steer had like 99 pounds, 100 pounds.
It was nuts out there. 52, 52 pounds is lead, something crazy. Those fish, I don't get back to the river, are gone now. They were part of, that was basically driven by the 2003 year class. Those fish are gone, but there's another, we've had record hatches for the past, 5.
Seems like every year. So
yeah, this year was a little bit down as far as hatch, but there's a lot of big fish in the system that are coming along. Tons between 5 and 7 right now.
Yeah.
We had a tournament out of Geneva last year, and we were doing 50, we were casting, and we were doing 50, 60, 70 fish a day and 65 feet of water, and so many fish between 4 and 7. They were just all cookie cutters, 5 and 7. So, but that with Detroit River, vertical jigging. We'll talk about the trolling bite out there too. People are starting to do some other things. First gear, I love medium fast rods. Have my St. Croix sweatshirt on. I'm really partial to the St. Croix. The Legend.
You use that heavy metal rod out there? You got one of those?
I do have one, but I'm partial to that 6/8 medium extra fast.
It's good. I have a couple of them. We were out there for that tournament, and it was ripping, and we had all sorts of stuff. And I'm running those 1-ounce jigs, and I caught so many more fish on that rod versus anything else.
From the heavy metal.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is an Icon, and I had the new Avid one, and I told the Dan, I'm like, I don't know if I just had better play, feel, I could feel everything. I mean, it's a broomstick basically, right? The thing is, it's 5'8" or whatever it is, and it don't bend. But
it's definitely a pool cue for sure.
Yeah,
I like something a little bit more flexible in a tip. I do a lot of tip watching out there, so I see a lot more bites before I feel them with that extra fast tip. And I like the length because the depth changes so much. So I just like a little bit longer rod where I can change depth just by giving a rod a dip.
Yeah.
but that time of year, you're targeting, those fish have, first of all, they get in there a lot earlier than what people realize. We shot that next bite out there 2 years ago, in November. So again, the acoustic telemetry is showing that these fish, everyone thought that those fish were holding outside of the Saginaw River and outside of the Detroit River, and they would come in the springtime. They're actually coming into those rivers in November, in October,
So they're
and
winter in there.
overwintering right in the rivers. So we've been fishing late this year. We were jigging the river until we couldn't take the cold anymore, and pretty much, the launches started closing on us.
Does it freeze up?
It
Very
it freezes.
seldom.
There's no way in hell I'd take a step across it.
No.
Yeah, it's pretty frozen right now. There's a good ice dam above Belle Isle Bridge, but it freezes up. But early in the year, Belle Isle Bridge I mentioned is a great spot. You get fish that are migrating down out of St. Clair into Lake Erie. That's the first spot on the U.S. side where it's kind of a pitch point. You have a lot of current right there, and those fish will kind of build up. Same thing at the cow pasture on the Canadian side, which is just on the east side of Belle Isle there. There's some other spots further up in Canadian water, but I'll talk about these. The water's a little bit deeper, it's a little bit faster, and those fish will kind of go there first before they start to make their spawning foray. So as you're fishing that river, you want to look for big pre-spawn fish. One of the keys of finding those fish on that river are finding undeveloped shorelines. On the U.S. side, there was a lot of industry at one point, and a lot of the shoreline has been directed out. So you go to the Canadian side a lot, and you see some more sloping, gradual shorelines, rocky, where a lot of the spawning activity takes place. And in those fish, that spawning activity takes place primarily at night. So you go really, really shallow at first light out there. There's a first few spots I can't name. There's some charter captains that would string me up by my toes if I mention the spots. But there's some spots that are 4 or 5 feet of water at first light, where those fish have spawned all night and they're kind of still hanging out there before they start to drop back. You can really, really get into some really big fish.
The U.S. shoreline is just trash. I mean, it's still beams and concrete and rebar. And
you better have exquisite boat control to fish in some of those spots.
Right.
You're going to be donating all day long. But they do. But it does hold fish. Trenton Channel holds fish.
Oh yeah.
But again, talking about migration, that migration into the river and out of the river has been changed because they've shut down those coal burning plants. The candy canes in Trenton Channel actually blew them up this past year, so they're no longer there. So that warm water used to call those fish into the river, and they come into the Trenton Channel, and it's actually altered the migration of those fish, where they're actually starting to come in on the Amherstburg side, the Canadian side, where the shipping channel is. It's a little bit deeper and it's faster. So we talk about this migration, but humans impact these things.
Yep.
We say we're doing a good thing by getting rid of these coal fire plants and doing this and doing that. That's something for another conversation.
No doubt, right?
But just talking about fishing, it has altered the way the river fishes. Mid-river, they got rid of some of the discharges also, and it's changed the way mid-river is fishes. But again, undeveloped shorelines, rocky shorelines. And what you do is you want to get shallow early in the day, and then as the day progresses, again, the same thing I said earlier, people will leave spots as the bite dies, when really all those fish do are just slide down the break. They may start in 6, and they may end up underneath the Ambassador Bridge in 45 feet of water. So they're in that area for a reason. They want to spawn. They're not going to make a long run in the river, so they'll just kind of slide up and down that break. This is where your side imaging comes into play.
Yeah.
You go along and side imaging, you'll see them on that break. You'll know exactly where to make your drift. And I think that's really underutilized by a lot of people who fish that river. Side imaging is gold on that river.
Side image is gold everywhere. You can get rid of my 2D as far as I'm concerned. Just give me, I've been saying it since it came out. I'm like, side image is on 100% of the time. Obviously, don't have to work on plane, but and then I changed my kilohertz, to 400 or something when I'm super shallow. And I'm like, dude, there's fish everywhere. Like, there's nothing here. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. Move on. I got it. And I'm like, I've done it to my friends. I'm like, do this, switch, in a hummingbird, you can switch over. And he's like, oh yeah, you ain't kidding, man. They're everywhere. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. So that Detroit River, again, you want to target the shallow stuff early and then slide deeper. People are really starting to troll. So growing up, we did a lot of long lining out there, but now folks are actually pulling boards. I had a buddy who was on the river, just before the Novi show last week. So about maybe 10 days ago, before it got really cold, he's pulling boars and bandits up in mid-river, and you got a 2-man limit. So, and in the springtime also. So what these fish are doing, they're spawning on the bottom, but then after they spawn, they'll start to suspend. If you really start to pay attention to your sonar, you'll see a lot of high marks on the river, and a lot of people don't think those are walleye, but they are. One of my dad's favorite things to do was fish gold Hottentots in the middle of the river.
Oh, hot top, baby.
Yeah, really high in the water. And we started doing that. I was like, oh, brother, here we go. He's playing around, and he starts whacking fish, and it's something I've done ever since. But those fish will come up and suspend. A lot of the high finishers in the Michigan Walleye Tour last year were pulling boards down in the lower river, pulling bandits. So again, another way to fish those fish if you really don't want a vertical jig or pull wire, God forbid.
God forbid, right?
You can pull boards out there and do extremely well on the same quality of fish.
Yeah, I had never done the hand lining thing and didn't. And even that tournament we had there, I actually took. I had three. If I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go with 3 ways. So I'm gonna, at least have a rod in my hand.
Yeah.
And I took them out of the boat. And then that morning, right before I put it in, I was like, I dropped the tailgate. I was like, I better just throw a couple in here in case, because it was muddy and sure enough, I drop it back with a hit stick, like middle of the day, and I catch my 5-pounder on a 3. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have put it out there if I didn't already have it rigged up, put that on the boat, but I didn't. And the next day I did catch 2 on a vertical jig, but one was snagged, so I had to throw it back right away. And then, and I was like, well, that sucks. And then it wasn't 1 minute later, pop, got another hit a 5-pounder legally. I'm like, all right, it's good karma.
It sucks, but if you're a tourney guy, you got to have your hand line or pole line stuff in the water, and that's another way to fish it. You get some of these old boys that have, been raised on the rivers. There's a couple of 70, 80, 90-year-old guys that are down there hand lining, and holy moly, they put on a clinic down there doing that stuff. It's impressive to see. But if you're ever interested, good place to come learn. Very, very willing to teach those kind of things to people who've never done it also.
It's definitely interesting, and just I don't know, something about fishing and having at least a rod in your hand.
Yeah,
and I saw a lot of those coinglers stuff come in with their hands they were thrashed, man. Yeah. And I'm like, did you wear a glove or something, or what? I didn't know what I was doing, or the guy didn't offer me something, and he just sitting down there, and I'm like, oh. And the worst thing was they didn't catch nothing. But.
Yeah, it's hard on your hands, but it's a meat tactic. It catches fish, no doubt.
Yeah, it definitely works, and I get it. I see why. So are you fishing? Did you get into the NTC this coming year?
I'm not fishing NTC this year.
Okay, because it's here in South Dakota on Lake Francis Case.
Yeah.
So question, maybe you have some insight on this, that it's been tough on Francis Case, and this last year was really tough. It's a tournament out there every week, and it's 107 miles, huge reservoir. And there's tournaments everywhere every week, and they're typically pretty small. Everything in South Dakota is a kill tournament after 1st of June. Mm-hmm. Where everybody goes fishes where they typically go in May and June, and after the Chamberlain bite, which hasn't really been the greatest even the last couple of years. It's pretty healthy, and there's a lot of fish. This year, people could not catch fish, period. I mean, there was tournaments, 20 boats, and there was like 2 fish caught. And early. And then there was a weekend, I think it was sometime in June, where boom, it blew up, nice bags, everybody caught fish. It lasted like 2 weeks, and then it just disappeared again. And the biologists down here, what I was hearing from some of the anglers up there, they were like, oh, they think that a lot of the fish didn't spawn. A lot of the females, obviously they can reabsorb their eggs and whatever. But we had a early spring. Ice was off in early February, but it was a very slow warm. Mm-hmm. Like even when it should have been 60s, it was still in the 50s water temp wise. You would have thought, boom, everything's going to be ahead of schedule. It just, we had some nice days, but the water temp just did not go very fast at all. So maybe these fish, I just keep telling them, you're all fishing in the wrong spots. This is the problem. You're going off memories, you're going to where you typically go, and they're not there, you're giving up. If you ask me, you should have been a whole hell of a lot shallower. These guys are trying to target these fish in trees, but the biologists tell them that they all didn't spawn, so they're all in a funk. Huh. I'm like, I wasn't buying it. I'm like, on 100 everywhere from one end to the other to this place, that's what happened. I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched them spawn in Chamberlain, so I know they spawned up there, but there's obviously, residential fish throughout that system.
I think I would be in a little bit of a panic if that many fish in a system didn't spawn. If there was something environmentally going on with that many fishes, because there's always a small proportion of fish that don't spawn.
Right.
that you'll catch them in June, July. They're reabsorbing the eggs. You'll get like a hard orange mass or something.
Yep.
But that many fish, boy, that'd be something if that many fish didn't spawn. But
Yeah.
even if that were the case, even if they didn't spawn, still you'd have to account for what's changing their behaviorally.
Right.
Something, that's too much, I think. Sure, some may not have spawned, but I'd bet, if they laid egg mats out or something like that, they could see. I'm not familiar with what they've done out there.
Yeah, they put nets out, everything, spawn Chamberlain, but they're still, and they migrate and what have you, but they don't all. There's certain, that everything they need is right here in Platte or in Pease Creek or in this area. So these fish don't all move, and it's the lower part is where they were all kind of struggling, and that's where the NTC will go out of in June this year. But I didn't get up there at all. Actually, I don't think I've been up there since NWT tournament was there. But I'm like, well, you had a couple good weeks of it that it went away, so it tells me that the fish are there, and I know that they all did spawn.
They shifted a little bit. I know a few years ago it was, as a matter of fact, it was the year you're talking about on the Detroit River. It was that really cold spring, and there were some other things that had gone on. Michigan DNR had egg mats in the Trenton Channel, and there were very few eggs on those mats. I think they may have had some mid-river around Wyandotte also.
That's where I caught a lot of fish at Wyandotte.
Yeah, so those fish weren't coming into their normal areas to reproduce, or at least they weren't seeing eggs there. But again, I mentioned earlier that sometimes you will have river fish that will pull up short and spawn in a lake. So it could be the same thing where if you have fish that are normally spawning in creeks and creek arms in the springtime that are pulling up a little bit short, maybe spawning on rocky shorelines or points or something along those lines where they've kind of adjusted a little bit because of something that's happened. Here was water temperature that did it. Out there, you're saying the same thing, and the weather was a little bit different. The water temp was a little bit different than normally. So those fish just kind of shifted a little bit before that large of a body of water for that many fish not to spawn and then not to bite, to be in a funk because they didn't spawn. Not saying the biologist wrong. I'm not doing that at all. I would just have some other questions. That's all.
I would have loved to have been the guy talking to him.
Yeah, like you said, I think those fish just kind of shifted, and folks were in the wrong areas. Fish have fins; they're going to go wherever they want to go.
That's exactly, and we're creatures of habit, and all these guys are just going because. And I talked to a few people that don't fish there very often, and they came up to fish the weekend, and they did good.
Uh-huh.
I tried to explain it to the guys that did it all the time. I'm like, this guy had no idea where he was going or what he was doing.
But he caught.
But he figured it out because he's electronics, and he went and he didn't go to where you go because he doesn't know of the honey hole or the community spot or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
So he went, started shallower, did this, went way up in a creek,
Yep.
I'm like, you all just memories, which
I think you're spot on with that. Those fish moved, and I've seen it on Erie. We had a championship out there, and we all fished. So I was stubborn. I went to my spots, and I catch 1 9-pounder and everything, and it was actually all the guys from out west who were hammering the reef, Kelly's Island Shoal, and they were all the good finishers out there. Because I went out there, I said, I can catch fish here, but I'm gonna do 25 a day. I'm gonna get my ass kicked. And those guys went there, caught 25 a day and won.
Yep.
So I think you're onto something. The fish just kind of shifted a little bit and acted a little bit differently than normal.
Well, we're stubborn. We know not to do the memories things and this, but you get tricked, right? You roll into a spot and you whack a 8 9-pounder, and you're like, oh yeah, this is it, and then you get tunnel vision and you forget about everything else. And then also, like you said, you're chasing fish that are with the bait's gone, or there's no, it rained 2 days ago, and now that runoff has moved, and you roll their tournament more, and you're like, there is nothing here anyway. You're like, now what?
Hey, so that goes to show that even having all of this knowledge and being a biologist and studying walleye and everything, that when I launch that boat sometime, I'm still making dumb mistakes and going off memories just like everyone else. So it's tough.
We've all been here. We've all done it. Hey, we've already been on here for an hour. I know you are a busy man. You got a lot of work to do. You got a lot of research to get done, and we can talk for hours. So we'll probably get you back on here again, and we'll dig into some more of this a little deeper. Are you fishing anything this year? You're going to be where people follow you? You're going to see out there on MWC, NWT, anywhere?
Yep. MWC. We're going to do Illinois River, Port Clinton, Owyhee, Badenoch, and Wisconsin. I can't think of the lake right now. Then we're going to do. I think I'm going to do NWT, Alpena, and New York. I'm going to jump back in. I jumped in a few years ago full-time NWT, but I was recovering from a rotator cuff tear and was having a tough time. I didn't think it was very fair to my co-angler, so I pulled out. So I'm looking to make a jump back into the NWT, and I think this year is going to be my segue to doing that. So I'm going to do a couple this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, we got a couple of them that aren't too far for you, way far for me, but not too far for you. So I'll take care of these two on this half of the country. You take those two on that half of the country. We'll just transfer my points over. I said, like, give these to Ali. He can have them.
All right. At the very least, we can exchange information after the season.
Yeah, I got whatever place in the first two. I want to transfer my points. So we can do that. He's got to pick up the second half, out there in them Great Lakes. So awesome. If we could leave these listeners with one little tidbit, one little nugget to help them in their angling journey, what do you got to offer them? I mean, you offered them more than they could probably take in already, but
yeah, I would leave them with something we kind of touched on already, and that's to pay close attention to things. Try not to fish memories, to pay close attention, and when you catch a fish or you see something that catches your attention, to ask questions. Why was that fish there? What was that fish doing there? Why is that bait fish there? When you start to look at those things and ask those questions, it'll lead you down a pathway, because that fish was there. There's other fish there. And if there's other fish there, then there's other fish like that in a similar spot. So being really observant can kind of help you develop these patterns and have a knowledge base that you can use, not just on the body of water that you fish, but in other places as well. Because I say it all the time that a walleye is a walleye is a walleye. So always remember that. A walleye is a walleye, and it's going to do what it does. So wherever you go fish, pay attention, be observant, and make some mental notes and keep track of things.
That is good stuff. That reminds me of a few things I've always said in a few seminars is I've never seen a walleye read the Walleye Insider magazine.
That's right.
So, like you said, a walleye's got to do what a walleye's got to do.
Right.
And it also makes you think of the old original In Fisher magazine, In Fisherman. I loved it. Just like probably fell asleep with that thing because it had so much scientific information. I don't know if that was from Doug Stange days or whatever.
That was one of my hooks. I loved it.
Right. That's what we just don't see a lot of that out there anymore. Next Bite does, do a pretty good job with it, but the In Fisherman is, lenders no longer have that, and I don't necessarily read it near as much now, but it used to just be very, very, even the TV show was very scientific on stuff, and it was super educational. So and there you go. It was your hook. It was my hook. So we got caught. So if you guys are young and up and comers, it don't even matter if you're new anglers into the walleye world. Check those out. Go on YouTube. Follow Ali along on his social media stuff. He's got some great things over there. He's always surprising with what he's got growing in a fish tank somewhere in his house or wherever it may be. Yeah. But follow him along this year on his tournament journey, and the guy's a hammer, and you're going to see him out there. Check out the Next Bite. He's done like 2 or 3 shows at least. Those guys, I think.
3. Just shot my 3.
3. Yeah. So watch those. It's good information because just like I said about the In Fisherman, when Ollie's on there, he gets to bring that little perspective into it for him. So you might become a full-time, host on there when they start having little scientific segues. It should be a segment of the show where they talk a bit, the conservation corner or whatever you want to call it. Brought to you by Ali. So
we've discussed a few things, and we're going to have some more discussions on that in that light. But again, I'll be posting some stuff on social media and things just like this. So, but again, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been a joy, and I'm normally not that hard to get a hold of. So next time you want me on, just
no problem, man.
Responsive next time.
No problem. You're busy man. So that's good. That's you're saving the walleye world out there, and we all appreciate it. So appreciate the insight. Appreciate your time today, Ali, and thank all you for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk Fishing. So stay safe, and we will see you on the hard water for the next month or so. So.